Hi, I'm Jackie Robertson with What's New in Noonan, and today we are with a local author, Russell Lingerfelt, and we're going to learn a little bit about your books and why you love to write. So first of all, tell me about, and I'm actually an avid reader. We talked about this one other time when we did a What's New in Noonan. So tell me about the Mason Jar.
The Mason Jar is a family-friendly epic love story about a guy who goes on a journey. He meets a girl along the way, and he decides to pursue her instead. And we could go into a lot of detail, but that's a pretty good overview of how the story goes.
Okay. And what inspired you to write?
Well, when I was a little kid, I started writing in a journal, and I used a 3-ring binder, and I probably had filled up 5 or 6 3-ring binders about this big by the time I was about 15. And just writing about, when you're young and you're living life, everything is new, everything is fresh, so it's so exciting. It's very interesting. And so one of my mentors had told me that if I would keep a journal about growing up, that I would have something to give my kids when I got older, my grandkids, but also it would be something that when I got older I could look back and read about my life growing up, and then it would just be something that would mean a lot to me when I became an older man. And it's one of the best things I ever did because it taught me to use one word instead of 3. It made me a writer of thrift. I would read a thesaurus to look up for new words to use. So since you've been doing it since I was a kid, it's just a craft that I've honed in on. And I grew up in a town of 1,000 people in rural Alabama. I grew up on a dirt road on the edge of a cotton field and pepper field that my dad worked in when he was a kid.
Wow.
So to go from that kind of rural life down to Auburn University and out to Pepperdine for grad school in California, and then traveling the world and then landing back in the Old South, it's been a great adventure. Yeah.
It's so awesome that you were talking about your mentor told you to journal everything, because especially being a parent myself, sometimes I think your children don't realize that you were someone else before you were their parent, and what a great way to be able to show that other side of you, because I think people forget. Definitely.
They forget that they don't realize their parents are human.
Yes.
Yeah, until they get older.
Get older. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So in addition to the Mason Jar, what else have you written?
Well, I wrote a novel called Alabama Irish, which it has a slow beginning, but people have told me that Alabama Irish is actually a better novel than the Mason Jar.
Okay.
Alabama Irish is my second one. It's the sequel to that one, but it's a standalone, so you don't have to read the Mason Jar to read Alabama Irish, but they do use the same characters and go hand in hand. The Mason Jar, it starts off in the middle of the story, whereas Alabama Irish prepares you by letting you get to know the characters first. And so the Alabama Irish isn't as popular as the Mason Jar, but once people read it, they tend to believe that Alabama Irish is better. But the Mason Jar is the one that became the national bestseller in 2014.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So this wasn't something I said I was going to ask you, but I'm curious. What are your favorite authors?
I really loved Thoreau. Growing up the way I did, he had lived in the countryside of Massachusetts before Massachusetts got big. And this was in the 1800s. And he just lived in a cabin in the woods, and he wrote about his experiences being surrounded by the wildlife. And he spent a couple of years out there by himself. And the way he words growing up in the country and being friends with Native Americans when they were threatening the settlers, when the Native Americans were threatening the settlers, ambushing them when they would just be on a raft going down the river. So he writes about what it was like living in a world where if you took a raft down the river, you might not come back. And it was just really interesting. It gives you a glimpse. It's like a country boy's perspective on American history. And so I really loved Thoreau, and then I read every single thing that C.S. Lewis wrote. During my college years, I wrote everything that Robert Frost wrote. And then when I got a little bit older and deeper into it, I was reading actually works of philosophers and theologians. There's a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer that wrote during the Nazi regime.
Yes.
You've heard of him?
I've heard of him, yes.
There's a theologian named Henry Nouwen he's a fantastic writer. And then when he got around 60 years old, he just got burned out on everything, writing books, traveling and speaking and teaching. And he ended up living his final years in Canada serving at a mentally retarded institution. And he just lived among them and worked with them as a counselor for the rest of his life. Well, during those times, he wrote some really great books that give you insight into just people in general. Not only the people that are going through that severe mental problems, but their families and their loved ones, which gave you really great insights. Now what I do is I'll only read something if it's been recommended to me by numerous people, because there are so many books. And I feel like I read a lot of self-improvement books, but what I learned is once you've read Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, pretty much everybody's saying the same thing, but in different ways and putting it in different contexts. So now I don't really try to read anything unless I know from a few people that I respect and know really well, who's also prolific readers. I won't read something unless it's highly recommended.
Okay. So where can people get the Mason Jar in Alabama Irish?
It's in bookstores everywhere. You can get them Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon. Of course, Amazon. That's a no-brainer. But they're on all of the ebook readers as well. Like even if you have a Kobo or a Nuke, definitely Kindle. But they're easy to find.
Okay. And if someone wanted to get in contact with you, how do they reach you?
Well, they can reach. My website is jamesrussell.org, so like St. James and then RUSSELL, jamesrussell.org. And all of my social media outlets are posted on that website. So when people write me on Instagram and Facebook, I can get back with them pretty quick. And if you want to call me, you can just check in with these nice ladies here, and they'll have my office number and my cell phone number if you need to get in touch with me.
Okay. And in addition to writing, what else do you do?
Well, the way I ended up in Noonan, I've only been in Noonan for about 9 months. Edward Jones, which is an investment firm, they offered me a position, and they said I could go anywhere in the nation. And I was looking at Malibu, California, where I went to grad school. I was looking at downtown Franklin, Tennessee, which is one of my favorite towns. Fairhope, Alabama is a beautiful town that I was looking at. But I met a girl in Noonan, and they asked me where I wanted to go, and I said, I'll go to Noonan, Georgia. And they said, why Noonan? And I said, well, I met a girl. And they go, oh, okay, that's fine. And so I got here about 9 months ago, and things are going really well. I really love this town. It's a great town.
It is.
Yeah.
It has a lot to offer.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's, I think Noonan has this really uniqueness about it that you still have so many people that have grown up here, lived here their whole lives, and then you also have the perspective of people that move here from other places.
Well, I had someone in Alpharetta who is in the financial industry. They said Noonan is the best blue-collar town that's the closest to Atlanta. And I really, well, that's how I grew up. I grew up with, where I grew up, you were either a school teacher, you worked at the local cooperative, or you worked at the local plant. And so being with farmers and blue-collar folks is how I grew up. And so what I love about Noonan is you got this fantastic downtown, and then there's great restaurants there. There's great restaurants popping up between here, Noonan. You got Peachtree City. You have an international airport. You can just drive 30 minutes to the international airport and be in Beijing within 24 hours. So I've traveled to Europe a lot. I've traveled to Africa and the Middle East. So it's fantastic to me to know that I'm within a short driving distance of Franklin, Tennessee, Fairhope, Alabama, Charleston, South Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina. We're really close to the mountains in North Georgia. Like Dahlonega is a fantastic town. And then you can get on an airplane and go anywhere in the world and get there pretty quick. So I'm sold on Noonan, and I love it here. Yeah.
Well, very cool. I completely agree. Okay, well, check out the Mason Jar. I can't wait to read this.
Thanks.
So I'm excited. So I'm Jackie Robertson with What's New in Noonan.